Welcome to another episode of Monte Talks. And today we will be talking a lot about routing, a lot about state management, and overall best practices for building Vue applications. For your host today, you have me, Jakub, a senior full stack developer and advocate from Monterail. And with me joining today, we have a special guest, Eduardo. Eduardo, if you could tell a bit about yourself to our audience, introduce yourself, tell us what you do for those of us who still don't know you.
Of course. Thank you for having me first. So my name is Eduardo, full name San Martin Morote. I go as Bosva on GitHub, and I'm a member of the Vue.js core team. I work mostly on the router and Pinia, which are the projects I have authored in the past. Not the only ones, but the ones that take most of my time. I'm very committed to maintain.
Sure. Um, so tell me how you end up working or contributing or maintaining things with Vue. Why Vue, to be more specific?
Vue for me was in the time of Angular.js becoming very popular and people realizing that it has limitations. And Vue was one of the libraries that was out there. And I immediately had a click when working on using Vue. That was Vue 0.12 that just came out at the time. It was pre version 1. It was almost as version 1. It was very, very similar. And I remember that every time I was 22 at the time, I think 20, yeah, 22, 23. And I was building side projects in the evenings, and AngularJS was the library I was using at work, and I could feel some limitations or things that were bothering me. So in my side projects, I was simply exploring other libraries out there. I came across Vue, and as I started building stuff, I felt very comfortable very quickly. And every time I wanted to add something new, it just felt natural, or rather I had an intuition of how to do it, and then I would check the documentation and it would be that way. And so that's what made me stick. And then I started trying to organize the the Vue meetups. I started to push using Vue at the company as well, which we ended up doing for a few projects. And then one thing and another, I managed to get more active, or I just got more active in the discussions. Well, the time was issues, but people would ask questions, and so I would need a lot of triaging, and I did a lot of triaging on Vue, Vue 1, Vue 2. I think you can search that on GitHub. You will see that I have. I think I'm the person with the most comments, or maybe the bots now have more. But if you remove the bots, I should be second. I mean, I should be first if you remove the bots. And yeah,
Sure.
one thing led to another. Evan created a core team, asked for people to join. I applied. It was like a form, I think, or maybe I don't remember what it was. I think it was a form. I applied, and then I found myself in a Slack channel the next day or 2 days after with a bunch of people. That was 2000, I think 19. No, it was 17 or 18. I'm not so sure. Maybe 17. Probably 17.
Sounds amazing. Like in some way from zero to hero, right? You started just building with it, and then you realize that you can
Ah,
help the community, help it grow, help the project grow. And why I wanted to also ask about the projects you mentioned, right? Pinia and Vue Router. So when you were first building those things, have you ever thought that they will become such core parts of the Vue framework, of the Vue ecosystem, or were they more like some side projects that maybe they will be used by someone, but you weren't sure?
yeah, Pinia, I wasn't sure at all, right? It was more of I was scratching my own itch. TypeScript support with Vuex was really bad because Vuex wasn't it was created before TypeScript was really popular. So, and Vue as well. So a lot of the things, a lot of the difficulties in typing Vuex are intrinsic to uh, its syntax, its API. So my idea was to create something that could benefit from type inference in TypeScript, which is the most powerful feature it has, I think. And so that was just my own project, and it was very small at the beginning. I remember that Directors was, I mean, Reject was, so Directors was one of the few first projects using it, right? at the very, very beginning. Vue Router, on the other hand, was a bit different because when I started writing the Vue Router 4, which is for Vue 3, I was already maintaining Vue Router 3 for a long time. And my goal was really to, so I had a very good knowledge about how the code base work, all the difficulties, and what could change, what had to change, all the things that made people confused using the router. And I know that nowadays there are still a lot of things that confuse people in routing because it's a complicated topic, but it improved with the before. So my goal was to create a version for Vue Router 3. I was already in kind of maintaining these versions, so I was, let's say, responsible for the project. So I knew more or less, or at least I had the hope, right? That was my goal. It was, I'm creating something to be used by the, to become the next official version. It was meant to be the official version. So it was more in the plans, or more as a goal. It was part of the idea. With Pinia, I was really free on doing whatever I wanted, right? It doesn't matter if the API is completely different. I can come up with some crazy ideas. If it fails, it doesn't matter.
Sounds great. I remember one of your talks. I think it was in Vue.js DE, but not the recent one in Berlin, but the one in. Sorry, it's not. It wasn't the recent one in Bonn. It was the one in Berlin
Exactly,
a few
before,
years
right?
ago, and it was you had a talk about the. I think it was the TypeScript hell of
Yeah.
routing,
Oh, yeah.
something
It's
similar.
stop writing your own routes, I think was the
Oh,
name for it.
exactly this one. And it was amazing when you were showing those,
The
spaghetti code
types.
of types. It
Yeah.
was a nightmare, I suppose, to maintain.
So yeah, it's okay as long as you don't have to touch them 2 weeks later, right? It's type that is really. I think nowadays you can just ask the LLM to write it for you, because it's just the syntax is so heavy. It's only ternaries. Doing logic with ternaries is a bit difficult to read because loops and conditions have to be done that way. You have a few tricks. I name a lot of variables with very verbose names, so it ends up having long names, but it is easier to to handle it that way than having short names for the types, for the type params when you have generics. But otherwise, yeah, this is unmaintainable. And some of those types never made it. Others, less complicated, made it to the code base because, well, if you really want a really good experience in developer facing libraries, you need to face these difficult choices using TypeScript.
Yeah, I completely agree from the maintaining perspective. In my case, it is obviously in much smaller scale because for example, the Nuxt modules that I maintain, they are much smaller, much less complicated.
They're
But
more
still,
focused, maybe, right? Or
more focus on
sorry.
solving specific, let's say, smaller issue. But still, if you get those people to join you in form of like contributors, community that are reporting issues, trying to figure out how to do certain things, to help you improve the documentation as well, or in general how to improve the module or the package by adding some new features, then
Mm.
the amount of things you have to learn and how to think about the project you created, it grows like so much because there is so many people, so many ideas, and you have to become some sort of like a project manager, let's say, trying to
Yeah.
manage how the project goes, which are the priorities. It's really complex stuff that we as for example developers who use the tools, we usually don't even think about. We just think that this happens out of the box, right?
Yeah. In a way, yeah. I mean, you see the results. I think that's how it's meant to be. Yeah, you don't want to be bothered with all the
Internals.
details of why things went one specific way. Most of the time, you don't need to know the why of some of the decision choices.
Agree. And at this point, when we mentioned the TypeScript, like generics, the ternary and stuff like that, I remember the video I watched some time ago about the guy who created Doom, the game
Mm.
in TypeScript, and
Yeah,
how he was like
from
showcasing the
Michigan TS.
whole process of sorry.
From Michigan TS, right? The
I think so. I think
Forgot
so.
his
Yeah,
name now,
it's
but
it
yeah, I met
was
him in person. Yeah, really cool.
defining like the whole process of building it, how the problems he needed to overcome, like the limitations of the
Yeah, the
compiler
size,
and
right? Memory
stuff.
size or something.
Exactly. So he needed to overcome so many issues along the way, or limitations, to make it work. And I think at the end, the compilation took around 15 hours or something like this. It was so crazy, waiting 15 hours to see if you haven't made a typo.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. So if we can come back to Pinia, I wonder about one thing, because you mentioned, for example, that Vuex didn't have that good, let's say, TypeScript support. So when building Pinia in the first place, what were the, let's say, lessons that you learned from Vuex? The things that Vuex, for example, didn't do that well, so that you can make them better in Pinia.
um, I think most of the things were connected to TypeScript in a way. The dynamic module registration is one of the things that was pretty much impossible to. It's impossible to have automatically inferred because the way it works, because the way you access the store is global, and the way you registered uh, stores was also in a way global. So I wanted to move away from that and go closer to function based calling. If you have function based calling, in the worst case scenario, you can have a force type that you in the library you basically write a fake type. You just do as any as something, and I mean as unknown as something, and you force the type because you know it's going to be that type, and you don't have to handle all the complicated things. This works for injections, for example, which are also go through a global channel, and they cannot be type safe, purely speaking. But we force them as type safe because that's easier. And this is one of the reasons the modules or the way stores are created in Pinia is independent, right? There is no one root store per se. You have a root state where everything is connected, but I think even that I could have not had it. It was just easier to handle. It was more of an implementation detail in the end, because then you serialize the state and you just have one variable to serialize. But maybe there are versions where you don't do that and it's even better. So for me, the way things were registered and disconnected uh, really made me realize that that way of handling things was really nice in JavaScript, because it was powerful and you could easily extend things. And I think this is one of the big things in JavaScript that you could see also with libraries like jQuery, for example. But if you wanted to have TypeScript, it involved hacks. Uh, in the worst case, hacks. In most case scenarios, it was just not possible to type. I think that that's the biggest lesson for me. It really stayed, as a thing I think about sometimes when I'm implementing things in APIs, and the way I shape these APIs is not to have or to try to minimize the amount of global registrations and this decoupling that can happen, because I know that in those scenarios I will have to hard code some of the types somewhere else if I want to have type safety, which nowadays is a given.
I see. I see. So maybe if you can also answer one question, you probably answered it quite some time already, or a few times already, but maybe for our audience, what was the inspiration for both the name and the icon of
The
Pinia?
icon. Okay, so first the name gets, because it makes more sense. The name is pineapple in Spanish, but not exactly, because you have a character which is called ñ, which is just the n with a little wave on the top, and instead of being pronounced, so instead of pronouncing uh, the word would be P-I-N-A. So that would be pina if you pronounce. I mean, if you pronounce that like an n, but because it's an ñ, it's piña. So it's just different sound. That's not available on npm. You have to use ASCII characters. So I just chose a name that was available and that was very close to the pronunciation, which is with an I, piña, because in English it sounds very close to the piña, piña, piña. And the reason I chose piña is because for two reasons. The inspiration came from a Spanish expression that says something like "We are a pineapple," and so this means we are a group. So we are together, something in a way, together as multiple people, not something romantic or anything like that. It's more like a team or something like that. But also because the pineapple itself, and I think this metaphor is really beautiful, uh, is a multi-fruit plant, will be the word in English, is a multi-fruit plant. So you have multiple flowers that give multiple fruits, and as they grow up, or they grow, they fuse into one single big fruit, which is the pineapple that we have in the end. And I think this matches very well the image of stores that are all created independently, but they are connected to the state, to the same state, so they become one in the end. I thought that was nice. That was a nice metaphor.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think I heard part of this story somewhere, but hearing it now,
Yeah,
it's even better. And
yeah. Most of the time, people think it's just because I like the fruit or something, which I like the fruit. I mean, I like all fruits, so
and there is an addition to it, which was released
Pinia Colada, yeah.
also, Pinia Colada, which you can
Which is
also share a bit.
yeah, and also the so Pinia logo. I paid a designer for it. Um, I contacted her on Twitter. She was doing some. I initially searched a few things online, and I found a person online that was creating designs that had a vibe that I like. It was really about the vibe. It was a little bit the the mood that the character has. And I asked her to create something. We had a few iterations, and that was it. and and I took that logo. I think I have changed. I've done iterations on it myself, like closing the eyes and moving things like that. But that's it. And then Pina Colada is another library that came out. So I started building that 2 years ago, or 1 year and a half maybe. It's part of my mastering Pina course in a way, where we build a more simplified version of it, a more bare bones version. And my goal was to to distill in one library all the things I've learned about state management and make it very small and extensible for Vue, really adapted for Vue and the Vue ecosystem. So it's very light. It's less than 3 kilobytes if you only use the queries, and it's 3 kilobytes gzip minified. I mean broadly minified if you have mutations and queries, which is very very small. Pinia itself is about 1.5 kilobyte gzip minified. So, and the name is obviously the cocktail. I mean, there is no other thing. I don't have. I could come up with a metaphor if I wanted to. Like, yeah, you just have to chill about your state or anything. And often I use this, but it's just that the name is so easy recognizable. It's just pop culture, right? Because if you like Pina Colada with the songs, with the Marvel movies, it became a lot more visible. So I thought it was a good reference that would click immediately for anybody. And people would just smile when they see it. And the logo, I wrote that myself. I designed it myself when I was at the hospital with my daughter, but when she was 6 months old, she was having a bronchiolitis, so it wasn't really a good time, but she just needed to rest. So I had a lot of time at the hospital with my computer. I opened Figma and I would just start work on that.
Wow,
Yeah,
this
that's the
this
story.
is a story that I'm not sure if you told anywhere yet. If not, we
Probably
are
to
unique.
people directly.
Uh, we are unique. So if we now can move into routing, which I'm
Yeah.
also really interested about. So routing, or in general, maintaining libraries such as router, which is used in so many different applications, is probably a really difficult task, right? Because there are so many use or edge cases that you need to somehow be able to cover, like the classic Vue SPA, like Nuxt with the server-side rendering, or hybrid rendering in general, probably even
Yeah.
some different scenarios like static site generators. So what, in your opinion, is the biggest challenge of maintaining such library?
I think the challenge is change over time, and they will probably keep changing. So in the past, it was definitely browser compatibility and having to check all the inconsistencies that we have because we're supporting a lot of browsers. So this included Internet Explorer 11, but also older versions of Firefox, Chrome, and Safari. Nowadays, this is no longer an issue because because now we have browsers that auto update, so we don't have that issue anymore. 95% of on Can I Use, you can see that on the features that we depend and the consistencies that I rather have, I would like to have. 95% of the users are using a browser that are consistent, that are using modern features, or a more like, how to say, a behavior that feels standard. Because that was the difficult part at the beginning. It was that a lot of things felt like there was no what is the word, agreement between the browsers on it should work this way. Nowadays, especially with the navigation API, which is entering every browser, Safari still doesn't support the pre-commit handler, which is just a feature that allows you to hook into the navigation before the URL changes. So for an SPA, this is critical because you don't want to change the URL until you are sure that you're going to display the new page at the same time. They should happen at the same time, because if you have any relative resource that uses path that is relative, so the URL will depend we change this relative resource location. So small detail, but I'm pretty confident they will ship it soon. I think they just wanted to be able to. I'm not sure. I'm just I'm just making up things. What is the word in English? Conjecturing, or I have my hypothesis, but I think that because it was included in Interrupt 2025, they wanted to at least ship most of it to kind of mark it as shipped. But I would argue it's not shipped until the pre-commit handler is shipped as well. Anyway, so this API is consistent, is standard. It has in the spec all the behavior described, and this is what makes the API usable. Without, you don't have to worry about every single browser implementing it the same way, right? You don't worry about type of something being different in different browsers. So I'm extrapolating a lot, but that's the basic idea: is that, if you enter this text in the URL, what do you get in location.href? That was what happened. That wasn't consistent, for example. So that's changing for sure. And nowadays, what makes it more difficult is agreeing, I think, on good and bad practicing and spending time adapting to the new standards, especially finding ways to use these new standards in a way that more applications can benefit from. So you don't want to, I know this is a little bit abstract, but you want to make easy patterns that really empower good patterns for user experience. And on the opposite, you don't want to make it that easy, or you don't want to spend like bundle budget in a way. You don't want to make your library big to empower patterns that are not that great. One example I can give about this is the models. So in Vue Router, you can have models that change the URL. And if you reload the page, you stay with the model. But if you share the page, you're going to end up in a different page. This is something that I think Twitter did at some point. They don't do it anymore. I think Instagram may have done it. Personally, I think this is not really a good pattern. It's not that useful. You just change the URL if you need. You can add a query parameter if you want. It's not a great pattern to have the URL change where you have a model, in my opinion. So it has been possible for 4 years or 5 years, maybe, in Vue Router, but it's not really that documented. It's shown in an example somewhere, and every year or so, someone opens an issue or says, "Hey, can we do this? This new framework, this new router is doing it, and we cannot do it in Vue Router." And I have to say, yes, you can do it. Here is an example. But I don't have a good documentation to actually showcase to people and say, see how you can do it. And so this is one of the examples where you don't want to put too much effort in the general sense. So this can be bundle size, this can be API surface. You don't want to make APIs that are very precise to very specific features that are only going to be used in very specific scenarios. But you want to still let it be possible. So you want to build APIs that are low level enough to be usable for complex use cases, but you still want to find a middle ground where you expose an API surface that covers most of the use cases. And with the new APIs, this is a challenge because you need to rethink about these API surface. What things can go away? What things can you add? What things can be changed? So you have to think about what does a new API offer that wasn't possible before. And I think for the navigation API specifically, I would imagine that most people would migrate away from the HTML, the history API that we call. So they would migrate away from it once it becomes baseline, which means stable in every browser that has been out for 2 years. If I'm not mistaken.
I see.
Anyway, a bit long, but I think this is the difficult part nowadays. Is okay. Here are the new APIs. We haven't used them too much yet. How do we figure out what API surface made sense? What do we change in the existing APIs? What new patterns might emerge? And what new patterns do we want to promote in a way?
Sure. And on top of that, I'm really interested about learning from you, because you mentioned new APIs, probably some kind of innovation to the existing library. How do you balance adding new things, especially that some of them can be still experimental, with the, let's say, long-term stability of the package that you need to maintain, because there are multiple versions, there are multiple, let's say, frameworks. So you need the package to be stable, but you also want to push some new things that you also want to have in the library, new features, new APIs. How do you maintain this
Balance
balance?
that. So in the past, I would be very cautious about any new API that I wanted to add. I basically stayed very lean when it came to new things in both Pinia and Vue Router. One exception is anything that can be tree shaken. So if you can add it in a function that can be tree shaken, fully tree shaken, then it's most of the time it's fine. Because if it really is a common use case, this function can also be in a lot of cases written in the user land, in the user code base. But if it's really common, then it's better to have it as an official version. And if it can be tree shaken, then it doesn't force users to use it, right? So users can use if they want. One example is store to refs in Pinia. Store to ref is not necessary, but a lot of people like this version, and it's fully tree shakeable. And it's a lot of types mostly. The function is mostly types. The runtime code is very, very small, but it doesn't add anything to the size of Pinia when I compare it, right? Because it's not part of the minimal needed to have a functional and feature complete Pinia. So in new versions, I'm exploring the experimental path as well. So in Vue Router, you have this new experimental export. So Vue-router/experimental exposes new APIs that are not following some versioning. So you need to, if you use them, you need to pay attention to the changelog. And I've shipped through these the new custom resolvers, which is going to be one of the topics I'm going to be talking about in the conferences this year. So in Amsterdam, we'll be talking about this. It's more about Vue Router version 6. So it's currently we have version 4. Version 5 is going to be a simple, easy migration, which I released the beta just before the podcast. And version 6 is more about moving these features forward, still as experimental, but becoming stable in 7. Because 6 is also about having ESM only, which is another topic. So the idea is, if I can play around with this new export, people can use them. I can get feedback on it, and it's easier to iterate over them, especially with AI. People are able sometimes to ship a lot, and so they can experiment with things very often, and it's easier to get feedback. It's easier to build things. It's faster to build things. People are more likely to build things they wouldn't build manually, and they can just experiment with the APIs as long as they have some documentation to feed the LLM. So my goal here is to have a shorter feedback loop and be able to release these features as non-experimental faster. And so another one is data loaders is also coming as experimental. And the other way of shipping things without having issues with stability was to release them as a separate package. So this is Unplugging Vue Router, for example, which made it back into the core, into Vue Router, and it affected Vue Router development as well because it adapted types, but everything without having any breaking change, right? And anything that, for example, still requires some thinking. For example, scroll behavior. Scroll behavior is an interesting API because, well, with the navigation API, for example, we could expect this to just work out of the box, but it still have a few if. It works out of the box if you use data loaders so that the data loading happens before the navigation. So when you're in the page, everything is ready to be displayed, then the scroll works. Because you let the browsers just handle the scroll. The thing is that you will always find edge cases like, oh, but I have multiple containers and I have these horizontal scroll, vertical scroll, and I want to save them all. So you need a way to handle that. And you don't want to ship a feature like that for everybody because this is very niche. Like most applications are not going to use multiple scrolls. You just want one scroll. So I remember that I think it was 2 years ago, with Anthony, with Anfu, when he was in Paris, he needed something for the scroll behavior. So he created a library and he asked me a few questions about a few doubts he had, and I helped him in a few points for this library. And now there is this library that is out, which is Vue Router, but the scroll behavior probably. And I think this is a good example also of seeing adoption on features and see how many people are using it. Is it really widely used? You can iterate on it independently. It has a different version that you can pin on your package so it doesn't break features. Any plugins are not going to rely on it, right? So you're way safer going with this approach of a separate package. Sorry, I think it went very long.
Yeah, but it
these are three
answers all my
strategies I use.
questions. So in terms of the stability, but about that, because you mentioned, for example, mainly about Vue Router or Vue in general, but how, for example, you also maintain the not just the stability but also alignment between, for example, Vue as a core framework with a meta framework such as Nuxt, because probably there are some differences, right, in terms of how the routing is handled in classic SPA and in Nuxt. So do you
So yeah, the
or
server-side rendering, the idea is that it's more complicated than SPA, right? So if you handle the SSR by default, then the SPA just becomes an edge case. That's how it's been handled from the beginning. So when I started working on Vue Router 4, SSR was already concerned from the ground up. I mean, from building the library. So it was taken into account from the beginning. And then Nuxt is free to use the router and extend it in any ways they see fit, and sometimes to experiment with new ideas. For example, one of the things that to me bothers me a little bit in a way, more because if I create integrations that rely on this behavior not changing, but it's also interesting to experiment with, is the suspense, the automatic suspense on Nuxt. So Nuxt is able to allow you to use suspense with their own data fetching. There are await things inside. And so what they do in a way is that they render a copy of your application to render that part, which is necessary. And it ends up having a very nice API for what I think are simple data fetching. So it makes a very succinct, very simple to write. And in the best case scenario, when things work well, this is just very simple code to write. It does require this double render, which in most applications shouldn't be an issue, right? Having a double render of the main page shouldn't be an issue. In very specific cases, it can be an issue. But for me, it means that the use route that they use is different from Vue Router because they need a route that is different in order to render these two different trees of different pages at the same time. So we discussed about it, and I adapt things if needed on the router most of the time. I mean, the people in Nuxt are very good, and I'm very close to them anyway. And so we talk about anything needed, and we just adapt it. And sometimes I want to also push features in Nuxt that exist in Vue Router. For example, the typed pages is something that they incorporated, and I adapted the unplugin Vue Router so that they could use it in a way that didn't break their file-based routing, because they have their own conventions. I created the unplugin Vue Router once, which I intentionally made very, very close to Nuxt. I think we have a few differences, maybe related to optional params, because I remember that I came up with my own syntax. I don't know if it's the same nowadays. Now it could be the same, but for example, we have named views in unplugin Vue Router, which is not something that exists in Nuxt file-based system, because I think they don't need it that much, or it's not something they want to use. I don't know. So my goal is, I know they are aware of things that as they evolve, I talk to them when I know that some things could be useful for them, and then we collaborate if we need to implement any changes together, if we need to adapt, so that things are easy and very close between the Vue Router and Nuxt. In the end, Nuxt is not about the routing itself; it's about all the other things that it brings, right? So Vue Router is just like the baseline Vue official router that works well, that is battle tested, is light, is fast, and can be used by any library. In fact, for example, Tanstar could have used Vue Router if they wanted. I think that would have been better for them, but then they wouldn't be able to do a Vue Router for Solid and a Vue Router for React, right? Because I don't really care. I don't want to spend more time thinking about other abstractions. It's already complicated enough, and I prefer to focus on one framework that I like and do it well.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you would have to create an router, which is like universal router for any
You
kind
could.
of web framework. But I suppose like the amount of edge cases, and it would be
Yeah, it's more about the rendering, the way framework renders. I think that you could create a router that works well and reuse the code base. In fact, even Vue Router, you could reuse the router for Solid and Svelte probably, but maybe not React, because it renders differently and it renders too many times, so you would have things that do not work well. Even Solid, I don't know. I think that for frameworks that are closer to signal-based reactivity, it would just work. In the end, the real abstraction is the router view, and router link, and then the composition API parts, the use router. These are the parts that are specific to Vue. Everything else is just agnostic.
I see. So now if we can move a bit into, let's say, the future of Vue, of Pinia, of Vue Router. So how do you see Pinia and Vue Router fit in, let's say, the Vue long-term vision? Do you see it already, or have you talked about it with Evan? Like, what is the where those two tools fit into the long-term vision?
So we have talked about things, I think maybe a year ago or a bit more, but the reason, so the idea is Vue is pretty much stable. If the browser doesn't release any groundbreaking feature, Vue is fast, is efficient, is well used. So there is no reason to break things in Vue. This is why I think the focus has been shifted to the compiler part, which is a very, very good, is another topic. But when you have these compiler abstraction, you can also afford to have changes that are invisible to the end user, because you have your abstraction layer where the breaking changes happen. But because that abstraction layer is meant to be used by a tool, not a human, then it's not a breaking change anymore, because those were internal APIs. So this is where the innovation happened, is more in the performance and development experience. So the language server, and same happens for Vue Router, right? I'm moving things to the compiler, basically. What can I do at build time that I can strip off with the runtime? Pinia doesn't have too much left to strip. It's already small enough. I think there are ideas of how to improve some of the, let's say, APIs to be performance first. So for example, when you have a store, it's a reactive object. And I think this is very convenient. but some people might want to have kind of like a composable in a way that if you return a ref or you return a computed, then it stays as a computed, and you don't have to. So you can just unwrap the store. One of the problems with this approach is that the plugins wouldn't work, and the plugins is something that most people overlook in Pinia, but it's what makes Pinia Colada powerful is the plugins, for example, and it has been there since the very beginning. They improved thanks to Pinia Colada, but the main idea was there. So I don't think Pinia itself is going to change too much. The goal is stable, it's simple. You don't even need to learn it. Honestly, the docs are not even, unless you want to do these plugins things, you don't need to learn. You don't need to check the docs. Only if you want to check more advanced stuff. This is why I created the Mastering Pinia course, is because it has more interesting stuff. Also, how it is built inside. So some people like to learn how things are built inside, and they want to build their own. That's more the idea of the course. The router, on the other hand, is moving more to the file-based routing and to approach that are fully type safe. So this is an interesting topic because it's about how do we code? How is it going to change with AI? And I think a lot of the way we interact with code is going to be not only code, but also the files. And the file system is also an API in a way. So this is why the file-based routing is interesting, because you can describe things in the file structure without even needing to read a file, which is very cheap, both for a plugin that builds, so for Vite, for example, but also for an LLM. It's cheaper than reading the file and recognizing patterns inside of it. Also for a developer, and this is something I have been saying for a long time, but the idea of having a file-based routing is that because it just sits there, it's very easy to learn because it's right next to you every day. You see it. So if you want to create a file that has a parameter in it, so what I mean, a URL that has a dynamic part in it, you can recognize it based on other examples. So it's very easy. Nowadays, you just ask the LLM and it does it for you, but so it doesn't even matter anymore. But I think that moving towards a more type-safe version and lighter version to consume that is fast is the way to go. You want a framework that works well with LLMs and is performant by default and has good practices by default. And I think that Vue, Vue is the framework that handles these the best. It's not the most popular in LLM generation. That's going to be React and Next.js, but React is nowhere near as Vue in terms of performance. It just has a lot more plugins, and that exploded even more with AI. But if you know Vue well, you can create more performant applications without even having to worry about it. And you don't need to tell the LLM, you don't need to steer the LLM about all these possible mistakes and stuff. So I think that's the way to go. Type safe code that can be read by LLMs, and file-based things that are handled at the build, so you still have this deterministic output and artifacts.
Sounds amazing. So about your work as a maintainer and contributor, what keeps you motivated to do that, year after year, day after day? What keeps you, engaged, motivated to do these things every day?
I think it's hard to stay engaged in some of the projects. Normally what keeps you engaged is community. It's more about interacting with people, seeing is collaboration with other people. So it's the human contact, the social aspect of it. Pinia and Vue Router are pretty much just one person handle. It's just me most of the time. And because they are stable, they don't change much. I'm not really needed that much outside. Like, no, people don't need to learn much about new things because there are not that many new things. Now there are a few new things coming up, and these are when I'm needed, but that's it. So it's difficult when you find that situation. I think it's important to find other projects that are more in that where you interact more with other people, that have more collaboration aspect to it, or that you build for other people. So you build for friends, for family, for yourself, but that you're able to use every day. I think this is the main important aspect is that you want to build something that makes you feel connected to others. Otherwise, you're gonna disconnect from the project in the long term. To me, it happened. I think I've disconnected a few times, but was very short. Conferences helped a lot to keep the connection, the social interaction, and yeah, I just have other projects sometimes that I build with. Nowadays, with LLMs, I can also explore other projects, even other languages, if I want in my free time. So it's very different. Even small ideas that I usually would not implement because they could take me a full day or a full afternoon because I still need to learn a few things. I could just ask, how do you do this, or research this, and then learn at the same time, review the code, and do the work that usually takes you in an afternoon in 1 hour, or sometimes even less. Sometimes it's just half an hour, and then you just push the boundaries of that work. So it's what you would effectively accomplish in 3 days, you accomplish it in 2 hours, something like that. three
Yeah,
days
I
in
agree.
in a week, something like that. So
Yeah. Mhm.
it's important because, especially because of that, it's important to keep that connection, that social aspect. So you build these projects, you build some of them for yourself, and some of them you build them for others or to share. When I build open source, I build it because I want it to use myself. I want to improve my life, and I think that I could improve others people's life. I find if I share something, usually I think I build something that can be useful, and I want to, how to say, it's more like I want to share it because I think, because I can see how it helped me, and I feel happy using it, so I want to share that with other. If it's not used, it's not an issue because it already helped me, right?
Agree. So we are slowly moving to the end of this episode, but I also wanted to ask if there is anything you would like to share with the Vue community before we wrap up. Maybe a new package, a new project, a new feature, or something that you would like the community to remember from this video specifically.
I would say Pinia Colada. It's pretty much stable. I'm honestly going to release V1 pretty soon. The plugin system is very strong. I'm able to. The dev tools are great. The API is stable. I'm able to add features that people might want or that are used to, but are still niche or are coming from Tanstack query, for example. So people are used to some features on Tanstack query, and I don't need to blow the main library. I can just add a plugin that add them at this compatibility layer, for example. So that's really cool. Honestly, it's worth a try. It's very light. It's closer to Pinia. It's way closer to the Vue paradigm. It's type safe, fully type safe, and it can be combined with the data loaders in Vue Router. So you have a lot of very cool features to use. The DevTools are really cool to use. I know that it depends on the projects, but if you use AI, you're not going to use the DevTools. But when you need to debug something, you're going to use the DevTools. And also the custom resolver. So this is the beta of the Vue Router 5. It allows you to move the compilation of the routes to the build time, so that instead of writing your own routes, you let this plugin write it for you, and it generates and all the code for every single route you have in your project. And because of this new version and this new way of doing things, we can also match query params, and we can fully transform params so that they become something else than a string. So you still have a string in the URL, but in the route.params.something, you have a number, you can have a date, a class if you want, a regex, whatever you want, an object, and everything can be type safe, and it's file based. It's pretty cool. I'm looking for feedback as well because it's not fully, it's not say it doesn't have full feature parity with the existing how we call it, the default resolver. For example, you don't have dynamic routing. Some things like redirects or aliases are not implemented yet. So yeah, some features are missing, of course, but I still think that the main core, the 80%, so say the Pareto, you want to go by the Pareto rule, is there. So give it a try. That and Pinia Colada.
Sure, we'll do for sure. So for the last question, where can listeners follow your work and stay up to date with your projects?
Yeah, most of the time is well, my projects on GitHub, and then otherwise I always tweet on X and on Blue Sky as well. I cross post.
And what is the handle?
Sorry, and the handle is Posva, POSVA, and on Blue Sky it's esm.dev. So like Ecmax script modules, the same, esm.dev.
Okay. So thanks very much, Eduardo, for joining this episode. It was really amazing to learn all those things about the routing, about state management, both how they were created, how you're maintaining them today, and what are the plans for the future. They sound amazing. So for our viewers, our listeners, make sure to check out both Pinia Colada and the new version of Vue Router. That will be it from our side. Thanks for being here, and see you and hear you next time.
Thanks for having me.